Hello, guys. Come in, come in. We got kind of a late start tonight, but it's well worth it. We've got a very, very special show for you. We're going to be talking about social emotional learning. We're going to refer to it tonight as SEL, also critical race theory. We've got none other than Dr. James Lindsay, the foremost expert in critical race theory in the world, actually. So we're very lucky to have him here. But before that, I just want to set the table for the discussion tonight. So SEL, social emotional learning, we're going to refer to it as SEL. It's sort of like, in fact, it is. We call it the Common Core from hell around here. So if you're familiar with Common Core, it's a top-down kind of federalized program. And the thesis behind that was, hey, we've got a great newfangled way to make our students more intelligent and more competitive in the 21st century. We're going to give this a try. Abysmal results. And in fact, the achievement gap between socioeconomic classes, it widened big time. So the same dude that brought us that, Bill Gates, is kind of putting his foot very much on the accelerator to something called Castle SEL. It's kind of the name brand of the big SEL group. Him and Zuckerberg and a couple of the other usual suspects are investing into this program. So here's what the program is. It's a teaching pedagogy. It is curriculum. It is teacher trainings. It's all the usual things. It's texts. It's exercises. It's all that jazz, right? And it's supposed to, here's the promise. It's supposed to make kids, easier to teach and, a new and improved sort of student. So again, the promise of it, it's a lot better than it deals with in actuality. But here's the most important thing, and this is probably going to blow your mind. This is actually not cool. Is that it's in literally every class. I don't care if it's homeroom, basket weaving, gym. Check this out. This is how it shows up in math. This is right from North Carolina math, how they're rolling it out. Have students generate additional vocabulary words that extend their emotions. Does that sound like an intellectual program to you? Definitely not. So again, this is the promise is to make you a wonderful person, all this stuff. But it is, in fact, anti-intellectual. Now, critics of the program, that would be me and maybe you by the end of this, we don't like the program at all. Not only is it anti-intellectual, it's downright manipulative with the language that it uses, with the techniques that it uses in the exercises, and we'll get to that in a second. But also, it's very invasive. So the program itself relies on copious amounts of data collection from the students in the form of surveys, writing autobiographies, doing confessionals in some cases, oftentimes without parental consent or knowledge, which is not cool at all. In addition to that, it sort of erodes parental rights because it's in effect reconditioning children based on their values and their beliefs and their culture. So without further ado, we're going to talk about that much, much more with Dr. Lindsay. So he is a social critic, which we love. He's also a mathematician. He's written 6 books from anything from religion to postmodern theory. But most important for us, he is the foremost expert in critical race theory. So Dr. Lindsay and, of course, Nancy.
Hi.
Hey, y'all.
Dr. Lindsay, it's just such a joy to have you zoom into North Carolina with us and discuss your experiences and your knowledge. So many people look up to you and your work to help them through these woke times, I guess you can say. I first heard of you in the fall of 2019. I had kids in a private elementary school that started to have some wacko materials I was noticing. Very suspicious along the lines of Marxism and communism and very confusing to me. And in doing research, I went down the YouTube rabbit hole and found the report of you from John Stossel and your colleagues about the dog park paper, which I know you talk all about. And I realized then just how corrupt and how politicized academia had become, and how now it had completely taken over so much of K through 12 education. We're just dealing with a whole new monster. So since then, I've become very engaged in this problem, especially with K through 12 education. I think that's the most special aspect of a child's life, personally. So what we're dealing with here in North Carolina is something called social emotional learning. And I've heard in one of your interviews when you were doing that dog park research about grievance studies, you said every page you looked at was like looking at a new dead body or something, which I thought was fantastic, because that's exactly how I feel when looking through this social emotional learning stuff on the North Carolina Department of Instruction website. So what can you tell us? What can you tell us about the history that you may know of about social emotional learning and how it relates to education? Did it come from academia? Is it merely just a money marketing scheme? Is there a relationship to critical theories that you've come across in your studies? Exactly what is your understanding of it?
So I just want to clarify that, I'm not a particularly deep expert in educational theories. However, I've spoken directly with an expert in SEL, and he explained to me that, and I think this meshes with what I understand of critical theories, is that social emotional learning is yet another example of something that is generally positive that has been co-opted by bad people to do bad things. So it's a contextual kind of thing that we frequently see with these kind of critical theory approaches that wind up in schools or corporations or government or whatever. Social emotional learning was originally developed for when you have these kind of kids that are struggling, they can't get along with other kids, they're in fights, they're upset, they have trouble at home, whatever the case may be, is to try to up their skills for dealing with their emotions and their say, as a mathematician, I often saw very frustrated math students, and sometimes they'd get very upset. And to learn to control your emotions, for example, is a valuable skill for people who, whether it's because of the math lesson or because of the social setting that you're in or because of something going on at home, is a very useful thing. And so social emotional learning was meant primarily for kids who were struggling with social and emotional aspects that would then get in the way of their learning achievement. And as an original program, I think it was not necessarily poorly conceived, but it has a context, right? When I was a kid, I don't know exactly everything that goes on in schools now, but we had like speech class for the kids who couldn't articulate or enunciate correctly. And the thing is most kids didn't go to speech class, but if you couldn't say squirrel or whatever other word, you had to go to speech class. So the idea would be, now imagine that it's no longer about, enunciation or phonics or any of this kind of thing. And now we're switching it into a psychological kind of the thing that you would expect a school counselor or even a professional counselor to maybe work with. Now imagine taking that out of the context of you have a child who's struggling with his emotion or his social setting or his stuff that's coming up at home that's interfering with his studies that you might deal with in a one-on-one or small group setting, and then you put it in the classroom for everybody, being run by a third grade teacher whose job is not to be a psychological counselor in an uncontrolled setting full of children. So you can see that it's been taken out of its original context, and it rapidly becomes poison in that regard. Now, as far as something like critical race theory goes, where I would be much more expert to talk about what that is and what it does, the social aspect of social emotional learning and the emotional aspect are both kind of, if you think of it, I know it's a weird metaphor to use, but we're all kind of familiar right now because of the pandemic. We're all kind of familiar with how viruses work. Mm-hmm. We all heard about the ACE2 receptor, and that's where the spike protein and all this. So cells have certain receptors in which, viruses are able to attach to those things and inject their material. Well, the idea, like in social emotional learning, has social awareness as one of the 5 big pillars. Well, social awareness can be actually, what's the social circumstances that you're in? How do you fit in with your group? Or it can very easily be turned into this whole power dynamics. How do you fit in an oppressor versus an oppressed context? So the critical theory, say of race or gender or whatever, is very easy to insert, like an attachment, like those receptor sites for a virus. And then the critical theory comes in and say, we have to understand the social component this way. And then these critical theories also they say that being too rational is actually an aspect of whatever the dominant culture is, whether it's white, whether it's masculine, whether it's capitalist, whatever it happens to be. And so they can use that emotional side to say that now we're not just going to work on, kids who have trouble regulating their emotions or understanding their emotions or with emotional aspects of their life that's interrupting their ability to learn. they're going to be able to come in and say, oh, well, we have to understand that emotion is a valid way of knowing, and that emotion is going to be tied to your social context, yada, yada, yada. And so you can see how SEL becomes kind of a Trojan horse with critical theory hiding inside. So, oh, we have this idea, social emotional learning. It helps certain kids. Maybe it helps all the kids. Let's take it out of its regular context. Let's blow it out to a common core program where now it's in math class where it doesn't belong, as opposed to, special small group or individual interventions with kids who are having a hard time. And then let's just shuttle in this oppressor versus oppressed dynamic. Let's make everything about the way that power dynamics make you feel, and make everything about basing your knowledge and whether or not you've experienced this form of discrimination or this form of oppression or whatever they want to call it, and make every lesson be about how bad that is and how that interrupts learning, and then how the educational program has to be remade from the ground up in accordance with, say, the critical theory of race or the critical theory of gender or whatever, to facilitate that, because these people have the incredible pretense of believing that they are qualified to engage in social and psychological interventions in classroom settings with children, and B, that they have a working understanding of anything like race or gender or whatever, when actually what they have is a very shallow, naive, and in fact Marxian understanding of those phenomena.
I think that was a perfect summary. And one of the questions I have for you in terms of inserting critical race theory into some of these vehicles or Trojan horses, like something such as social emotional learning that may have been developed with good intentions, once the virus gets in, is it possible to separate it again? So, for example, the bureaucrats in the North Carolina Department of Instruction will say, no, there's no CRT here in social emotional learning. We're just using the very basic surveys that don't have the identity matrices on it, just to make sure that that allocations are going to where they're supposed to go. So can any parent trust that at this time in this year in education? Or is there any way to expel the virus, or does the whole thing just need to crumble?
So those are two questions. No, parents can't trust anything that is being put out by one of these official administrative bodies right now. Absolutely nothing. What I continue to run into is kind of this mixture of two things, and I can't claim in any given individual, especially if I don't know them, which one is dominant, which one is maybe the only motivation, if there's some mixture. But it's a mixture of fully believing in this program and ignorance about what this program actually is, and meaning critical theory in particular. So a lot of times they'll say, oh, well, we're not talking about critical race theory. Those words never appear, but every lesson has something to do with racial equity, racial justice, racial privilege or whatever. Any of this identity-based stuff that's talking about equity, privilege, et cetera, is carrying this, that the viral DNA or RNA or whatever is in there. And no, parents can't actually trust these administrators or the school board members to tell them the truth, either out of ignorance or because these entities, these bodies, these administrations are filled with people who will misrepresent this stuff willfully to keep it going on. And like I said, I can't parse how much in any given individual or any given board of those two factors it is, but I see it basically in every school board in the country. So no, parents can't trust it. Now, can it be taken out? Well, of course it can. If the curriculum could be changed to this, and I'm not saying it's a short-term thing, it can be changed away from this. And so taking the focus off of privilege, off of equity, off of oppressor versus oppressed, off of identity, as a matter of fact, all of that is very straightforward, focusing on actual, achievement-based curriculum like basic mathematics, reading, literacy, scientific literacy and competence. All of those things are curricular changes and programming changes that can easily be made. The problem occurs when you either have administrators and teachers who are ignorant of it and going along with it thinking it's good. I see multicultural communities. This is not what should be going on. And then secondly, you have many others who actually think this is the way of the future. And until those problems are cleared up, both ignorance and the insertion of people who have no business. I mean, granted, it's not as bad as this probably in most places in North Carolina, but we just saw the thing in California with the literal Antifa teacher literally teaching, revolution and revolt against the country to children. And he got busted. And it's probably not that bad in most school districts in North Carolina, or I'm in Tennessee. But you do have people who are on board with this, who are present, who infiltrate these administrations. So there is no trust. And until that problem can get cleared up by putting more trustworthy people into the positions of administration and school boards and power, and starting to do some kind of an audit on curriculum and on teachers and on everything related to it, the problem's going to persist. I see the comment. I know North Carolina. I know all 50 states have teachers like this.
Yeah.
I assume there are probably more in California and more than likely in Virginia than anywhere else, because I shouldn't say that. Oregon and Washington exist too, but because those are kind of the biggest hotbeds of this problem.
Well, you're missing Austin. We have 26 different states, and I will tell you that Austin may be the most radical between Austin and Durham, James, just for the record.
Well, we have a person very similar to the Antifa teacher here at UNC Chapel Hill campus for freshmen required class, and he looks almost like his twin. So yeah, the problem here in Chapel Hill is significant, and it's definitely driven down into the schools.
So the problem, just like how they infiltrate or hijack a concept like social emotional learning, Marxists, and I say that without the slightest reservation, Marxists have for a very long time worked very hard to infiltrate various institutional structures, various administrative positions. And our society for about 50 years or so, or maybe a little longer, has been way too tolerant of allowing Marxists to pose as professionals.
Right.
They are not professionals. They are not. I don't think there are such things any longer. Very few Marxist college professors. There are Marxists posing as college professors.
Yeah.
There are no Marxist school administrators or Marxists posing as school administrators to try to forward the ideas of Marxism. And Marxism only does one thing. It doesn't matter if it's with race. It doesn't matter if it's with gender. It doesn't matter if it's with capitalism and consumerism. It doesn't matter which species of Marxism it is. It only does one thing, is it works to generate, well, I guess two related things. It works to generate consciousness, meaning a Marxist consciousness in everybody that it can reach. Easiest to do that in children, of course.
Right.
And it tries to occupy positions of influence and power that enable them to do that without being stopped. And so that's two related things, I guess. But really the one goal is to bring everybody into their crooked upside down religion. And so it's just like if we had some creepy priest taking up positions in schools, doing creepy priest stuff in schools. We would say that we have a priest posing as an educator to do whatever it is. Or if it's pedophiles, we would say it's pedophiles posing as educators to do what they want to do. Marxists operate in the exact same way. Their one objective is to raise a Marxist consciousness. If it's critical race theory, they raise a critical consciousness of race. If it's critical gender theory, they raise a critical consciousness of gender. If it's classic Marxism, they raise a critical consciousness of class. And the goal is to inspire this disaffected, alienated, aggravated group, who they are disaffecting, alienating, and aggravating to make them that way, to inspire them to want to reject the society that they live in and replace it with a new one under Marxist control. That's the whole project. And it's very unfortunate that it's come to this point where a significant number of people who education might be, of all of the sectors of our society, the worst in terms of the level of its infection. They realized in the 1970s that blowing up buildings and taking federal judges hostage at gunpoint was not an effective way. It wasn't moving the public. And most of these people actually became K through 12 activists. Most of the radicals of the 60s and 70s became K through 12 activists. They realized that taking over the schools was going to be the way to win generational warfare for their liberation project that they believe that they're engaging in. And so you see, a lot of the Weatherman Underground, which was an incredibly radical organization, took over the schools. And so they see these things as, just to kind of bring it back a little bit to what we're talking, the subject, they see these things like social emotional learning that get developed probably with good intentions and even to good results. And then they hijack them. And then they take the research that showed, oh, look at this effect that it had on these particular kids and say, look how successful it is. Now we're going to put it on everybody. And they're using it as a vehicle to poison things. And then, like you said, they can hide behind, like these administrators, either out of ignorance, if they're kind of a so-called useful idiot, or if they're willful perpetrators of it, they can hide behind the language and say, oh, well, we're not teaching CRT. This is social emotional learning. It's different. We use culturally responsive teaching, which is also CRT, that is somehow different But these things are just used to, again, they grab onto these things and hijack them to their purposes, and take them out of their usual context specifically so they can do that. And this is whether it's the role of a principal in a high school, or whether it's the role of social emotional learning or culturally responsive teaching as a project. They hijack these things and turn them to their purposes of turning everybody into people who hate their society and think in terms of oppressor versus oppressed conflict dynamics.
Yeah, I think that point about using the research too is something that you can absolutely speak to with your credentials. But even just reviewing the CASEL, the Collaboration for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is what the NCDPI references in the biggest SEL program, just reviewing that, when I was sourcing some of their citations, the research goes back to like 2011, 2012, which, you know, that a decade may not seem like that long, but in terms of how fast this woke movement has progressed, I think research bias today or research from 10 years ago doesn't necessarily apply today. Like they can twist that, like that might not have had the bias behind it, but they can definitely twist that and manipulate it to say, see, this is justified how we're using it now.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's what we referred to as idea laundering in the past, is they use either they use research out of context, or they create their own journals or academic journals, or they infect academic journals to accept their papers or extort them to accept their papers. Then they create a body of literature. That's what we were exposing with the dog park paper project. They create a body of literature that they then refer to and consider to be research or scholarship or even science. This is the science of education. Sometimes I've even heard, you know, in Sweden, they refer to gender studies as gender sociology and call them scientists of gender, which is preposterous. And race experts as critical race theory, which is just completely all preposterous. It's all just Marxism dressed up in new clothes.
Right.
As far as like a practical thing, what has to be done then, I would actually tell parents listening and other people that are paying attention, anything that has specialized jargon, which is a bit unfair to education specialists, anything that has specialized jargon, because that works like a cloak, probably has been infected. Social emotional learning. Wow, that's specialized jargon. What does it mean? Don't know, but it's probably been infected. What do you do? Well, we're going to need a full audit. We're going to actually need a full audit of anything that sounds too jargony, because that's where they hide their stuff, because they know normal people don't know what it means.
Right.
And it sounds good. How could you be against a program that helps children who struggle with their social context and their emotional states, that prevents them from learning in a full capacity? How could you be against that?
Yes.
You can see how they dress that up. It's like a cloak that they hide themselves in. And so a full audit that says, you know, well, what are we doing within SEL? So, you know, you've got this jargon on the screen right now, and it all looks very positive. And then you can, if you're better at this stuff and you get more familiar with it, and you've done some reading or whatever, you start to catch keywords. I see on the screen: appreciate diversity, foster inclusion. Well, we all know that those are specialized terms that have two meanings: culturally affirming, relevant to communities. Communities, we know, is a specialized term that's often like commune, like communism. And so it becomes, the difficulty is that not only do you have to request these audits, which, as we see, for example, from Nicole Solis in Rhode Island, they resist vigorously if you say do a FOIA request on these things, but then you actually have to end up having specialists step in to interpret this stuff. Like, who would read appreciate diversity and foster inclusive environments on first blush and think, oh, that's got to be something weird? But if you understand that diversity, for example, from Ibram Kendi, it means the hiring of formally trained experts in racism.
Right.
In other words, critical race theorists. All of a sudden, diversity takes on a new meaning. If you understand inclusion to be comprehensible only in terms of power dynamics, then certain people are excluded by, say, the presence of other people. So now you've justified purges. They call this in feminism the male gaze, or the white male gaze, if you add in intersectional critical race theory. So the idea that a white person is in a space might reproduce whiteness, and if it's a man, they might reproduce whiteness and maleness, and therefore justify their removal so that the space can feel inclusive. So what inclusion actually means, and who would understand this without doing infinite amounts of reading on this, is the exclusion of opinions, viewpoints, and even individual people who they don't want to have there, because it's all in terms of the protected classes underneath these power dynamic analyses that they inject into everything. And I see filing a lawsuit gets you into discovery. That's the way in. That is the way in. Discovery is where most of this stuff starts to come up. You start to see where all the money is tied up. You get to see how vile a lot of this is and how corrupt a lot of it is and how tied into, I mean, I call it the iron law of woke corruption on Twitter. This is one of the most corruptible ideologies in the history of mankind. So you're going to find all kinds of like dirty participation, financially or with other conflicts of interest behind all of this almost every single time. And so the comment from Gabs is correct. You're going to have to file lawsuits, and you're going to have to not settle, and you're going to have to take them to discovery so that all this kind of evidence starts getting unearthed. And then unfortunately, experts who understand the specialized dual meaning terminology are going to have to be able to evaluate the content there. So these are going to be complicated suits, at least in the beginning, or complicated processes, at least in the beginning. But even showing up and unmasking the double language and then asking people, say at a school board meeting, and asking people to explain what they mean. Do you mean by diversity hiring specially trained experts in racism, or do you mean, oh, we're going to have different people with different opinions and different appearances? Or what do you mean by that? Enforcing it can be somewhat effective, but ultimately, it's got to go, as Gab said, it's going to have to go to lawsuits and discovery. And FOIA requests are going to have to be filed. File them all the time. Get as much of it out there as possible. Get the FOIA get the information that comes from the FOIA request, and then publish it through friendly media. Expose it. Blow the whistle. And be ready, because they're going to fight back with intimidation. That's how you're dealing. A good faith actor, and this is how you can tell the difference. A good faith actor in the school administration, when caught out on this, is going to have this reaction. Oh, I didn't realize what's going on. A bad faith actor is going to flip out and try to countersue you or something like that, or start accusing you of things.
James, it's happening. We looked under the hood at the state level here in North Carolina. Just North Carolina, for instance, happens to be a Republican superintendent. And I tell you what, we have never been so viciously attacked, and including being sued, like a coordinated effort to completely take us out. And it is true. You're right. You're over the target when you're taking the most flack, and we are really taking it. So I want to say to you all over the country, because we're in 26 states. Ilana, you're all over as well. Between you and I, we cover it all. You definitely have to start looking at the state level, James, because going to school board, getting involved, very important. But if you do not know the source, and if you do not follow the money, you're not going to be able to reverse engineer our way out of it. As to FOIAs, you guys, we're also being charged in North Carolina. Literally, they're trying to charge us $1,500 for a few documents. That's when you know, right? That's when you know you're over the target. And so you have to understand, in North Carolina, for instance, 56% of the budget, or somewhere thereabout, in the state budget, goes to education. If you think there are not a lot of hands in the cookie jar, you are absolutely wrong. We're covering $6 million grants, $4 million grants, etc., that are being given. We don't know how the hell that it's showing up in our school districts. We know this: teachers aren't getting it, students aren't getting it, and a lot of politicians want us to shut the hell up. And so I'm telling you guys, when you start doing things at the state level, that is why we all have to work together all across the country. Do we have lawyers? Yes, we have lawyers. We need them. Do we have friends? Yes, we have friends. Do we have people in the media? And here's why. You have to have this. It's sort of like de-arming a bomb, right? You need to do it. You need to be careful and have lots of support, but we got to do it.
No, that's exactly right. The problem is huge. It's everywhere. And like you said, the sure sign that the surest sign that you can tell that you're working with a big problem all of a sudden is that you make a fairly benign request for information or ask some impertinent question, and the response is utterly disproportionate.
Oh yeah.
That's the surest sign that you're dealing with ideologues or activists who are not at all interested in education and its actual mission. They're interested in power and manipulation, and that they're willing to play dirty and play mean to maintain that power and to be able to continue to do those manipulations. And these are, just to remind everybody, I mean, I know you know, but it always bears hearing it again. These are your children that they're screwing with.
Oh, Nancy, sorry, I have you on mute.
Oh, that's okay. That's why I couldn't believe it when I first noticed it in the first grade and fourth grade when my kids were at this private Montessori, and traced it up to professors and doctors on the board, doctors who were willing to try to get first graders to solve systemic racism. And I said, this doesn't make any sense. How does this even work? This is obviously an inculcation or an indoctrination of some type of communist collective. It was very confusing. And then all of a sudden this word started coming out, social justice. And I was like, what does that even mean? I didn't learn that in K through 12. And actually it was funny. I had my husband go to a diversity meeting because I wasn't allowed to go because I was going to yell at too many people. But he was more calm, and he actually asked them straight up, how do you define social justice? How do you define that? They were not able to answer. It was silence across the group of 30 or 40 people.
I can answer it for you if you need a definition. Yeah, there's a book about education that gives a definition.
Yeah, what is the definition? What would you?
Well, it actually, and this is particular to, you know, this one particular chapter that I kind of trot out a lot. I think it's chapter 17 in this very long book. That's neither here nor there because I can't remember the title of the book off the top of my head either. It says that where Republican democracy is interested in individual rights, social justice is interested in group rights. Right. So it is the shifting out of the individualist context into the communal context or the collectivist context. So you were right to pick up on the idea that this is somehow, you know, communist or collectivist in place of being, you know, normal American individual values, treat everybody as an individual person who, you know, we judge based on their character. We judge based on their merits. We judge based on what they do, what they've done, who they're aspiring to be rather than who they happen to be. So your intuition was right, but it's the shift in focus away from individual rights and individual outcomes into group rights and paying attention to manipulating group outcomes. Mm-hmm. And that's really, really dangerous thinking. Collective thinking is usually very dangerous. But when this also, just to say it, when you put those group identifiers in identity, which is a very personal thing, very close to people's very deepest core of who they sense themselves to be, and in particular when you do it with something immutable like race or sex or sexuality, then you have a huge problem on your hands because people will fight like crazy to maintain that particular identity. You know, all the research in social identity kind of backs this up. So all the experiments in history that have ever been run, whether it's the terrible, you know, truths of slavery here in the United States, whether it's the experiments that were run in the 1930s and 1940s in Germany that are much more famously regarded with this, when you start to invest people into their races and put them into conflict across that, nothing good ever happens. And that's exactly what critical race theory, for example, does. It's not much better when you change it to sex or sexuality or gender or disability status or fat status or whatever else. So it's very dangerous collectivism on top of being collectivism.
So that's what I wanted to show you. So social emotional learning, there's got a few features. So first of all, really what it is to your point, it's not a customized solution to a problem or a boutiquing, if you will, of an educational solution. It's like a dragnet. It's a universal mental health treatment. So I want to show you part of it that really drives me nuts. I mean, I have a cursory education in psychology, not enough. But I'll tell you that this breaking down of the personhood is a huge problem with this. So what you're going to be looking at is stuff that's going on for elementary schools. But one feature is constant self-examination. Mm-hmm. Constant. This is one feature of this program where it's diaries or it's maps or I'm going to blow this up to see if you guys can see it a little bit better. But this is just one exercise. So what you're looking at, you guys, this is a teacher's guide. Okay, so this isn't the actual thing, but it's asking students to journal, dialogue their journal, and visual representation. And this is ad nauseum. It's really self-confessions. It's your family origins, etc. And it's got exercises where it really singles kids out. Right? How many of you disagree? How many of you agree? Using peer pressure as a sickening lever to try to change the baseline values of students. Students are a captive audience, as we know. I'm going to show you a couple more and just kind of get your input, because I've got some real doozies. So this is social emotional learning. In my summation, social emotional learning is far more dangerous than just straight up critical race theory. It is ridiculously manipulative. There's a lot of studies where psychiatrists have done bad, right? Where they've really steered people astray. That's kind of what I see happening here, especially with young children. So here's what we're looking at. This is asking kids, do I have questions about my face, hair, chest, and body? This is a 7th grade class here, guys. And by the way, these are questions that are shared with the rest of the class. So getting children to confess very personal things about themselves, it's not just to get to know each other better, you guys. It's purely manipulative. This is in Orange County, by the way, in Chapel Hill. But this is by no means just them. Questions I have about growing up are, check all that or apply. Why am I changing? Does everyone change the same way? And when is it okay to kiss someone? Okay. And then the last one I want to share, this goes into the interrogations. You guys, interrogations are this is the crux of social emotional learning. Again, it's done in every stinking class, you guys. Math, whatever it is. Okay, it's asking questions. Here we go. About my friends. My best friend's name is. My best friend thinks that I am. Right? Something my friend does that worries me. My mom's name is. Today, I would describe my relationship with my mom as, so this is grooming. What you're looking at is grooming. It is getting incriminating information about students in order to use that as leverage. Make no mistake about it. This is information, by the way, which is shared with the rest of the class. This is straight out of Mao. I'm sorry. This is a Maoist type of educational program. James, what did you think of what I just showed you?
I mean, so it just kind of, it reinforces a lot of the things I already think, having seen some of this directly. The comment that I made earlier, I want to strengthen something about it. Teachers who are doing social emotional learning in these capacities should not just be fired. They should probably be fined or arrested. They are practicing psychology in an uncontrolled setting without a license, yes, which should be overwhelmingly illegal I think it is illegal in all 50 states. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever that this should be occurring with children in like I said, in uncontrolled environments. Typically, the kinds of investigations that you're seeing happening that you just presented are the kind of thing that a therapist, either working with an individual child or adult maybe, or a small group of people, might try to work through in a controlled setting, very clearly and deeply getting to know the patient in that situation before engaging in interventions of this type. And I've actually spoken to a couple of psychologists who are appalled when they have seen things like this, because they say that this if they tried to do this in an uncontrolled group setting, even with a license to practice psychological medicine, they could risk losing that license. And the fact that teachers are doing this with children in group settings where they don't know what they can't know what's going on with everybody, and the attempt to find out has to violate some kind of privacy, is just unconscionable, and in fact is probably illegal. It's just a matter of figuring out who can make the legal arguments that can point that out. My opinion would be that teachers that are doing this are not qualified to do this. So something that exists and might have benefit in certain circumstances is being taken out of that circumstance, which would be a controlled, properly therapeutic environment being put into a public classroom where it's going to be shared across groups it's 7th grade. That's one of the most socially awkward and personal and like freaking out about everything. I saw something about my lips, hair, breasts, whatever are like whatever. Are you kidding?
It's incredible. Well, look at this.
Unbelievable.
This is unreal. So these are, by the way, instructions for the teachers. So anytime you have stagecraft and a recipe and a cookbook for something, you know you're dealing with some shady stuff. And this is the way that Mao did it. Stagecraft, getting children to separate from their parents, from their history, from their culture, from their background. Why? To be able to accept a new one. So breaking someone down is the first step of brainwashing. You can call it what you will, of manipulation, whatever. There's a lot of experts disagree on the term. Whatever it is, breaking them down is important. This is what breaking them down looks like. 7th graders, let's say you've got 30 in a class, you have to self-identify, okay, as these teens will have to self-identify. What do you think about the Pledge of Allegiance? What do you think about video games? What do you think about this? In other words, you're isolating. Isolating. It is abusive, and children are having to suffer this abuse alone by themselves because, as you point out, James, that nobody's giving this information up. There is zero transparency and even less accountability in schools right now. Look at this. Here's another game. Here's just another way of getting students to confess. They're to make a star with 5 points, and those 5 points are going to contain personal information about you or your family, and you're going to go all around the room, and you're going to show the star to people and see how many people agree with you, how many people match up with the stars. I mean, and by the way, this is all being done in the same type of class.
Right. Yeah. So this is an attempt to create consensus around whatever opinion is going to be enforced with the most dominance. That's what it is. You get people to expose, what do you think about the Pledge of Allegiance? Well, if it's going to be portrayed that the Pledge of Allegiance upholds white supremacy or whatever, and that's going to be a big deal, now you've got a bunch of kids who are, even if they do support the Pledge of Allegiance, are now not going to be willing to admit in front of all their peers that they're the ones who support white supremacy. This is a means of generating consensus and conformity. And like I said, it's completely out of the teachers are not qualified to be engaging in these interventions, which no qualified person would possibly do to them. And so you have this kind of like double problem. And like you said, anybody who disagrees is now going to have to retreat and disagree within the context of their own mind. They're isolated. They feel like the weirdo. They feel like the person out. And this, of course, causes psychological discomfort. All of this is so grotesquely inappropriate and so far divorced from what any positive view of social emotional learning ever would have been, that I don't hesitate. Anybody teaching this should be removed from their jobs and possibly prosecuted. They are practicing psychology without a license. And as a matter of fact, they're not even practicing psychology. Like you said, they're practicing Maoism, and they're manipulating and psychologically injuring teens without any standing to even engage in the practices. And they're not in an environment that should be allowed to use those practices. The shame is that there are not enough clinical psychologists speaking up and saying these things, because when I say them, they're like, oh, well, James Lindsay's unhinged. If clinical psychologists would actually speak up and say, in my professional opinion, this is completely inappropriate for an average 7th grade teacher with an education degree to be doing in a classroom full of, vulnerable adolescents who are going to socially weaponize this stuff against their peers. And this is going to cause XYZ problems down the line. That would be a much different thing. So anybody who's watching who is a clinical psychologist who can get this in front of a clinical psychologist, really, we need an army of clinical psychologists willing to start speaking up and saying, this is completely inappropriate. This should not be in our schools. Our teachers are not it's not only are they not qualified, it's not even their damn job to do this. It's not your job. Your job is to teach whatever set of subjects that you are licensed to teach by the state of, whether it's North Carolina or Texas or Tennessee or whatever, not to do psychological interventions and manipulations upon your students who, I just want to just say the same thing over and over and over again. It's just so grotesquely inappropriate. It's very difficult for me to see any of this stuff and it shock or appall me, but I have qualified as shocked and appalled.
And what I just showed you. Okay. So yeah, that's very interesting. So parents always tell you guys, evidence is king. it's one thing if we suspect things and hear things, etc. So what we do is we get the evidence and show, because we like to show and not tell. Because James, you're right. Once you see it up close and personal, it will piss you off. And it's definitely, it's inappropriate completely. And we have, and you're going to have, guys all over the country, you're going to have excuses. You're going to have people say, oh, it's social emotional learning. There's been a lot of, there's been a lot of trauma. There's been a lot of things, and kids need this. You've got to have evidence. You've got to have evidence like this, and we'll share it with you all the time. Nancy, I'm going to see if I can play that video file here, because what we're being told incredibly, if you think that you are mad already, James, I'll wait until you see this.
Well,
this is
hang on
our
a second, because like, what on earth could possibly justify getting 12-year-old girls to talk about their boobs and their insecurities about their boobs because there was COVID and that caused trauma, which trauma is an extreme word. So COVID caused trauma because we all had to go home and deal with a pandemic or whatever, for whatever political reasons or whatever genuine reasons or whatever mix thereof. And now you have to describe your insecurities about your breasts as a 12-year-old girl to your freaking class and your teacher in writing. What in the hell is going on with that?
Yeah. Well, you're going to see, this is our state superintendent, and she's probably not unlike other superintendents at the state level. She thinks that SEL is the panacea for everything up to and including school shootings. Let's see if we can listen to this.
Extra minutes to express our gratitude for our school and district level administrators and local superintendents for their steadfast leadership. Students and families will, of course, be offered counseling and support, and we're grateful for the already existing social and emotional learning supports provided to students and staff as they prepare for an eventual return to the classroom. This is exactly why we must continue to have an intentional focus on supporting teachers with resources to ensure that the non-academic needs of students are fully addressed.
Not your job. Not your job. Not your job. It is the parents' job to deal with the non-academic needs. It is the school teacher's job and the school system's job to deal with the academic needs. And you can say that any of those things, see, you need a diagnosis before you start treatment. It is not a seventh grade teacher or a third grade teacher or any grade teacher is very unlikely to be qualified to be doing psychological interventions with children. They're certainly not going to be in a group setting where that's appropriate. And the classroom would not be that setting anyway, no matter what. So everything here is completely broken. Now, as for like being a panacea to even stop school shootings, this is because they don't understand anything. They literally think that the causes of bad things happening in society, when they're not manipulative Marxists, but they're these kind of good-natured kind of people who've been suckered into this stuff. The theory doesn't provide an adequate explanation for why bad things happen. And so they have these very bizarre explanations like, oh, power dynamics, like this poor kid grew up in white supremacy and he's never had his ideas challenged or never had to deal with the fact that he's going to see somebody of a different race and he flipped out and he brought a gun to school. That's probably not what was going on. And if social emotional learning would have helped whichever school shooter in the past, that would have been done in an individual setting. That would have been one-on-one with a qualified psychologist in a correct and appropriate therapeutic environment. That intervention should have been taking place in that kind of environment. It is not appropriate to drag into the entire school system. And then the fact that that's being used as the Trojan Horse to bring in all of this other critical theory nonsense, and as you said, this blatant Maoism, the cultural revolution, red guard generating nonsense is just so far beyond the pale. This is like kill it with fire. Like the entire to fix the school, like to get the virus out is going to require, almost a whole like shut it all down until we can figure out what the hell is going on and reboot. It's virtually at that point where because none of that is appropriate. And so again, I would urge anybody who has the capacity, who understands that there's a huge problem going on, is you have to start making information requests. Evidence is king, as you said. You have to start being highly suspicious of anything that looks like it's using specialized jargon. And you're going to have to, if you've taken up the challenge of exposing this, you're going to have to start doing due diligence and looking into it and saying, well, what does this really mean? What does this really mean? And looking more and more into these kinds of things, and take no specialized term at face value because they're obviously being used in manipulated ways.
Right. And manipulated for, what ends. I mean, I've always said that schools right now, public schools right now, are the most dangerous bar none place for kids, whether it's having your children groomed, whether it's having your children effectively taken away from you by the government, or school shootings. I mean, James, in a 7-day period, we've had 2 school shootings in North Carolina, 2. It's remarkable. Right. I mean, sadly, very tragically, horrifically, we had a child killed yesterday in a school shooting. And the response was that. And I have to tell you, I take exception to the superintendent when she said, you're laying responsibility at the feet of teachers. They're not trained. Most of we help a lot of teachers. About a third of our group are teachers. They don't want this. They know that it's bad for the kids. And quite frankly, they don't want to be responsible for something, yet another thing. And they're not trained.
Be responsible.
They don't like it.
They're probably, like I was even saying a few minutes ago, they're probably criminally culpable for this crap if it were to get brought to it, and it wasn't really their fault. Their administrations foisted this crap on them, their school boards, and like you said, at the state level,
top down.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on in North Carolina at the state level, but I just recently did some work in Virginia, and I saw the Ed Equity Virginia program that's put out by the Virginia DOE. So the Virginia Department of Education itself, literally citing Ibram Kendi and Gloria Ladson-Billings and Bettina Love, who is the whiteness is spirit murder for people of color, that famous lunatic. Like, those are the people that wrote this ed equity program, and that's being forced from the top down by the Department of Education throughout the entire state of Virginia. So your average teacher on the ground is as mystified and appalled by this, but also trapped by it, because their assessment, in which I'm sure they're being spied on every which way by the administration, their assessment is all going to be rooted in this as well. Taking it on at the state levels is also going to, I think it's probably, you have to show up to your local school board and make noise, and you have to agitate, but getting people at the state level, whether it's your state legislators, whether you're your governor, as involved as possible. And then, of course, making your decisions at the ballot box. Now, you mentioned, by the way, earlier, I was going to say something, Republicans, and, this is Republican school district or school superintendent or what, 50% of Republicans are just as complicit, 80%, 90% of Democrats are. So you're still, the parties are no safe haven. You actually have to figure out what these people are pushing, what they're supporting, and who's basically paying them. Because I would guess right now that it's about 80 to 90% of the Democrats and about 40 to 50% of the Republicans are whole hog into this stuff. It's just, they're all in. And so, it's not enough to say, well, I voted for the Republican. You're going to have to actually figure out who you're putting in there and what their views on these things are. And that's going at the state level. If you get a Ron DeSantis type character in North Carolina as governor, and you get it, I know that your state legislature would be able to be, tipped in the correct direction fairly easily, then, the State Department of Education could all of a sudden have a real reckoning on its hands pretty quickly. And so those kinds of things also have to be attended to for certain. And of course, right now there's no relying on the federal government whatsoever for any support, because it's going to full blast support the other direction, and in fact try to mandate more of this garbage, as was with Common Core.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's a lot of COVID funds going to it, a lot of ESSER funds, and I'm telling you, which you already know, James, and everybody out here, the lying is just epic. So when you get to the state level, you're going to get, a lot of transparency at the local level, but once you start getting to the state level, that's really where it is. And we really need for states to step up and be a firewall between what the feds have pushing down on us in the classroom. And so, what's happening, and I really want you guys who are listening to get very comfortable with saying this, we do not want DC to be running our classrooms, because that's in effect what we have. And actually we have it turbocharged here, because a lot of people had their hands out. Look, we've got somebody, the woman you saw, the superintendent, her right-hand man, is married to a lobbyist for critical race theory.
Really? How about that? Iron law of vote corruption. It's always, you don't even have to, you say you scratch the surface or whatever. You don't even have to scratch the surface. It's just on the surface. It's just right there. They're almost always corrupt. And of course, most normal people still respond vigorously to seeing this level of corruption. And so hunting that down and highlighting it is also of incredible value for people who have access, like I know you do, Sloan, to getting these kinds of words out widely, writing articles and creating shows and things like this. It has to just keep happening. They don't like transparency. They just don't.
Nope.
They absolutely freak out when people actually see what's going on. So evidence is king. This has been something that people who listen to my podcast, for example, will be very quick to back me up on how annoying it is, because I just read their literature into this microphone. Because if you don't show people, they literally think you're making it up. They literally think, no way Ibram Kendi meant that we should discriminate, even though he plainly says the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. Page 19, how to be an anti-racist.
Right.
Discriminate. That's how. He explicitly says so. And so, you actually have to show people the direct quote, usually about 50 times before they'll believe you that this agenda is as horrific as it is. Because what you'll find is people will see like the worksheet that we went through a moment ago, and they'll come up with some benign or more reasonable explanation. Oh, surely it can't be something that manipulative. It must be this better intended project. Oh, they just want to expose this, or they want to help kids deal with their awkwardness of puberty. But why is
Body
that happening?
hair.
And what's that?
Yeah. Body hair.
Yeah, body hair. Why is that happening in English class? Why is that, or whatever class it would be in any class? I saw the programs from the West Coast, at least with mathematics, that was, journaling on how did this math problem, not the specific one, but how did, your struggles with math make you feel as part of the math education program? And that's asinine. Math makes everybody feel bad. I'm a mathematician, believe me. I've done more of it than almost all of you. It always makes people feel bad. The end, math doesn't care about your feelings, it turns out. But the how does it make you feel journaling project becomes, well, is that connected to white supremacy culture? Is that connected to this? Is that connected? Do you feel like math is too masculine focused, too much of a boy thing? Do you feel excluded because you're a girl? Do you feel excluded because of your skin color? Do you feel like if you saw more representation from people who look like you, that blah, blah, blah? And you can see where the levers start getting picked into this stuff. And it's just so inappropriate. It's just so damaging and poisonous and frankly, I would say worthless, except it's way worse than worthless. And exposing it and showing it, like, who on earth would believe that the Oregon State Board of Education put out a document saying that focusing on getting the right answer in mathematics is white supremacy culture, if they didn't see the thing? And I would say in black and white, but I think it was in orange and white, like kind of burnt orange. And I vaguely remember the colors, but if they didn't see it for themselves, who would have believed that the Smithsonian would have put out a document saying things that productivity and loyalty and reliability and hard work and punctuality are white supremacy culture? If they didn't see the graphic with their own eyes, that had actually been put out by that. You
Right.
have to present, you have to show, not tell. And to show, you have to get. So getting this evidence, showing this evidence. The thing is 95% of people, and I think it's actually probably 94, just to be more accurate, 94% of people could be expected to hate this when they know what they're seeing. And I will give a little positive boost here. I go all over the country, and everywhere I go right now, I have people come up to me and they still whisper, and people need to stop whispering, because these are your kids they're screwing with. But they whisper to me, I'm a Democrat. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I want to stay a Democrat, and I agree with every word that you say about this stuff. So it's not as polarized as they want you to believe. It's not as left-right. Lots of people who generally identify as left-leaning, who accept most left-leaning policy and values, etc., hate this stuff as much as conservatives do. And they just have to be shown enough and to be given a support network big enough to feel encouraged to say so. And that requires bringing the evidence. And of course, if you are, organizing these things to be as welcoming as possible, try to stay out of the left-right paradigm. Name it very clearly: critical race theorists, Marxists, whatever. Most left-leaning people are not Marxists. They are as angry and afraid of Marxism as every reasonable person should be. And so that's, again, bring the evidence, show the people, and be as big tent as possible in that regard, and give people a platform where they can speak up I don't know if you watched the school board and what was it, Nemonis or Nemonta or
Yeah.
whatever in California last night. Holy crap, those people were really, really mad. And that needs to be happening everywhere in America. And they need to be people need to show up and not just yell, but actually bring, like you did with that document, bring evidence and read it off and say, this is what you're asking seventh grade. People need to hear it and see it. And the school board needs to be seen to be squirming in front of it. Because it's horrific what they've allowed or encouraged into the classrooms. And, you know, it's a military saying, and pardon my language, but it's military, is that shit goes up. And so, you know, it'll go up the chain of command, and we'll get to the State Board of Education that if you have millions of mad parents, the State Board of Education can't ignore it. Not forever, anyway.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, their time is coming up again. First, they'll definitely attack you. They'll definitely lie. But again, you know, we've seen it time and again. Behavior will be modified. And then the last thing I'll leave you with, you guys too, all the group leaders out there, especially the ones who write, especially the ones who do shows and get all this information out, you must absolutely hold both sides accountable. It's, in fact, Ilana, this is your statement, and I'm glad I thought of it. It's not about right and left. It's about right and wrong, right? So it's definitely about that, and you have to be willing to take the party tags off of it. Usually when politicians are cozying up to you, that's not a good thing, right? We want a good working relationship with everyone, but you cannot be co-opted. This can happen in a movement. And I can tell you, you have to, as group leaders, you have to maintain trust. You have a fidelity to the truth, a responsibility above all to the children and to helping parents. And remember this, that the government, their role is transparency. Privacy, that's the role and that's the right, and that should be the gift of the taxpayer. We've got it all reversed, right? We have no privacy. They have no transparency. We have got to flip the script. And it's going to take not only, look, if you want to go to the school board, great. I mean, everybody, you know, that I talk to, James, I'm kind of in the minority here because I'm not a going to the school board kind of a person. If your goal is to get the people out of office who are on the school board, then why wouldn't you have 150 people on the ground knocking on doors while they're doing their school board meeting and performing theater? You're taking copies of these damn surveys. You're knocking on every door and saying, look at the crap going on. Look at the crap going on. Look, and then live stream the whole thing, have everybody on the school board watch, and they're going, oh my gosh, I can't wait to make this meeting go away so I can get home and stop the damage. If your goal is to get them out, get your boots on the ground, show them this stuff. You don't even have to talk. In fact, go to a park and hand this to somebody and say, hey, sir, would you fill this out? See if you don't get knocked the hell out of. I'm serious. Is that offensive? And then you tell him, hey, did you know what's happening to kindergartners? Sorry, Nancy, you know how we do in the South. We're very little on words.
Oh, like I said, I wasn't allowed to attend the diversity meeting for fear of what might happen. Yeah, I absolutely agree that the visual of these is what is tremendous, and people will not understand it until you show them the visual and show them the words. And I mean, I've told people who have had questions about conference and stuff, go to the speaker's Twitter account if they have one and go through. It's so telling. People, I mean, they're crazy. Some of them just put this stuff out there and screenshot a couple and show the teachers going to this conference and be like, this is who you're listening to. And this guy is part of the abolitionist teaching network and thinks that spirit murder is going on. So should we really fund that? You know, and show them the pictures. It's so powerful, and ask them, does this make any sense whatsoever? I totally agree that the visual can be a huge help. And that's part of how that event happened at the school board in Sacramento the other night. It was the visual of Project Veritas getting that teacher right in front of the camera, like, you know, way up in front of the camera saying, I'm teaching your kids to be revolutionaries. Who's going to forget that visual? And that's what we all have as citizens.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, look on their social media. I just found one today where a guy's running his mouth about something, another California teacher, and he is high up or connected with some California Education Association. That's obviously this Marxist project. And just, a couple of minutes looking through his pictures on Facebook, which is public, it has him like, kneeling by Trotsky's grave with the hammer and sickle and all of these crazy communist things that he's put out there about how proud of himself he is for this. And so then, all of a sudden there it is. It's like, is this you? He's got some bold statement he makes. Is this you? So if you see one of these crazy comments, or you have a teacher or an administrator in your school, if you can just go see if they have a public Facebook and see what they've got on it. Because they probably posted a picture of them like sitting there looking directly upward to a statue of Marx, like the guy I found today. Like literally, like it's like he's curled up with Marx or whatever, looking up lovingly at his beard and at a statue. And it's like, there you go. Okie dokie. What are you doing? What's your organization? And now, as a result of me posting just a few images from his Facebook that I downloaded on Twitter, there are journalists looking into this guy and his school district and his organization that he's affiliated with and trying to find out, well, who's funding this? Where is it all coming from, et cetera. And it doesn't take that much effort as a citizen sleuth to go find this kind of stuff and then find avenues by which you can get it promoted. Right now, I'll tell you, it's going to be, after that guy in Sacramento, it's going to be hotter than hot to find actual pictures of teachers being Marxists and to put them on the internet. So want to go viral? Go find some evidence.
Yeah, but James, what's the publicity stunt without the publicity? Right.
Well,
so
sure.
So it takes the sting out of it. It's not, it's not fun to be, secretly Marxist and not tell anyone. Half the fun.
Right.
Getting your jolly shocking the hell out of people. But again, if you suspect somebody is, a Marxist in the closet, they don't stay there for long. Yeah, Tanya definitely wants us to know, and we should give Tanya credit. Her and her husband have been kicked out of a couple. Look, what's getting kicked out of a school board? We call that Tuesday around here, right? That's okay. That's all right. It's got to happen. But anyway, I'm really glad that you could, come and enlighten us, because, you're right. This is no different from any other enterprise that the progressives ruin. They can't build their own stuff, so they have to come in and ruin. And I would suggest, James and Nancy, and I would argue that we need to actually go and infiltrate. For the longest time, conservatives or people that, are busy or whatever, we've been like, school choice. We love it, love it, love it, love it. Let the progressives have education. Now we're in hell and clawing our way out of it because we ceded the territory. So a lot of us, we shouldn't be angry. We shouldn't be upset and horrified. This is just naturally what would happen. So just kind of accept where we are, instead of, being, put off by how bad of a situation it is. It is a perfectly understandable situation, given that we really hadn't been engaged for a long time. And so I think we're doing pretty damn good, because we really hadn't been engaged, but for less than a year on all this stuff, or roughly a year. So just another year of this, and we've got it made. So we figured it out. We're quick learners. You intimated how wildly unpopular this is. Not only is it wildly unpopular, James, look, just in North Carolina, 46% of all our students are literate. The rest are not. I think it's 45, 55, something like that. So in other words, a terrible idea coupled with terrible academic results. This isn't going to last for a long time. But again, everybody, it's up to you as activists. Don't just go out there, beating the war tom-toms. You got to say, look, you're getting crappy results. Plus, this is highly manipulative. We've got to do something. You've got to present those type of facts.
I'll tell you what you got to do too. People have got to be fired. When I was in Orange County, I went to the school board meeting and somebody asked me, what do you do? And I said, fire them. That's it. Just 2 words, fire them. People are going to have to be, screenshot and sue. People are going to have to be fired. People are going to have to be sued. People are going to have to be removed from their power, or they're going to have to be removed from their funding, or they're going to have to be seen as financial and PR liabilities. This is why, Project Veritas being a watershed is correct. Huge PR liability. And that guy, the Antifa in itself is angry as hell with this guy, this Grimes or whatever his name is, because he blew the lid on their little project, and now people are awake and they want it to all be under wraps. They want it to be hidden behind closed doors. They want it to be hidden behind specialist jargon and terminology, and they don't like to be exposed. So this is a watershed. Keep that energy going. Keep showing more examples. And ultimately, at the end of the day, what I've said that it's about, I used to say it was 5. I think we're at a dozen now. It's going to take about a dozen high-profile or significant firings or lawsuits or a combination thereof, where they take significant hits to where all of a sudden they can't be so bold, and the questions are going to start getting asked, and the digging is going to start happening. So Nicole Solis in Rhode Island, I mean, you should listen to what she has to say. She says basically to position yourself to invite the lawsuit. One of the things it's a different subject technically, but it's a kind of civil disobedience, whether it's about masks, which is the example she often gives, or whether it's some of these surveys or whatever. She advises to get parents to get together and get their students to kind of mass civil disobedience, refuse to participate, refuse to wear their masks, refuse to participate in these surveys or whatever. And then when the school cracks down, sue. Invite the lawsuit, get them to overreact, and then sue them for it. With the masks, it's denying an education based on no law. Right. With these kind of policies, all of a sudden, Gabs is in the audience here, so we know that the compelled speech is a very fruitful direction. This is compelled speech. My child doesn't feel comfortable having to talk about personal issues like this, and it seems completely inappropriate. And if they have to do with some protected category like race, sex, class, religion, etc., then there are laws in most states that are going to step in there. So invite the lawsuit, because it's going to take a number of people in school boards, and this teacher in Sacramento, for example, is one example, getting fired, getting removed, getting sued, becoming a PR or a financial liability. And I think the number's hovering around a dozen. And all of a sudden, things are going to start turning back the other direction.
Yep. Great. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, to the point, the example we just showed earlier is that why the hell are you compelling and really peer pressuring girls into revealing how they feel about breasts? And that's really what it is. You've got children too young to consent, let's say 5th graders, right? So I think an argument can be made if you're giving them a public assignment, right? It's compelling them. But if you're using peer pressure, I think a lawyer can make that case.
Yeah, I mean, people also don't understand that you often have rights regarding, say, speech, and you are always allowed to forgo your rights once you consent to forgoing them. But if you don't consent to forgoing your rights, you retain those rights. And a lot of people don't realize that. And so manufacturing this consent is another issue. And it's very difficult because, we're talking about children as the proxies through which all of this is occurring. But parents need to be able to stand up and advocate on behalf of their kids. Because I hate to put it this way, because I really wish the world was different. If you're not going to advocate for your kids, you can damn well bet nobody else is going to right now. The handful of us who are taking up activist roles in this are, in a sense, but we're not going to do the job you can do for your own children. I had a talk I did, like I said, in Virginia recently, in Loudoun County, and the guy who organized the event, and I'm so taken by this, he stood up at the beginning of the event and he said his name and he said, "And I'm a dad. That's where my credentials start and stop." And I thought, wow, that's enough. I'm a dad. Those are my credentials. That's why I'm here. You're screwing with my kids. And if you're a mom instead of a dad, I don't mean to misgender anybody as it goes. You're a mom. You are credentialed. Stand up for your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tanya's great. I mean, Tanya has a wonderful group here locally. In fact, some of the materials that we showed tonight came from her district. But I mean, her group will look literally to see if school board members have signed an oath and bonds. And if they haven't, boom, anything and everything you can get. We just hooked up with a couple of PIs. So wherever you guys are, definitely make friends with your private investigators. They can run everything from Interpol lookups to, everything that, a teacher has done, their relatives have done, every single thing about them. So we just got turned on to a few of those. They just came to our rescue to help us. And I got to tell you, those of you who are doing the work, who are getting attacked, go public. So we've been very public about people coming after us, people suing us, we name names. Every single time we do this, James, we actually have legal experts, journalists, PIs. How can I help? How can I get involved? You guys, if you do not tell people what's happening to you, you will not get help. We cannot do this alone. We have to be a network. The only way to get that is to say and ask for help. None of us can do this alone.
Yeah, and now there's such a network. Now that a lot of this has been exposed, there's such a network of people. You just reach out to one person, and it's they know 3 other people, or they know someone who's involved with a lawsuit, or who can get you connected, and you can make a quick phone call. Telegram, Signal message groups. You can say, like, I saw this today and it really bothers me. Anyone else? And you have the network right there, and that didn't exist a couple years ago. So that's another benefit of the people waking up. Is one of my colleagues, Beanie from No Left Turn, likes to say, "Courage is courageous," and I think that's certainly true. And there are a lot of really strong people that can be easily reached if you need that.
Right. Absolutely. So we have gone on. This has been a fantastic conversation. I mean, it is really an honor to be speaking with you, and that you spend so much time with us, and just amazing. I mean, we've got Ilana from No Left Turn here, and a lot of great people. And Tanya, you're going to put that up there. And so we just got to keep speaking out. Again, you need to be that beacon, and you need to let everybody know what's going on, what you found, show the evidence, etc. When we first started, literally, it was just pretty much I made the first few Facebook Lives. Nancy and I did a couple, and now we average 6,500 views within a 12-hour period of publishing each one. And so of our Facebook Live. So that's pretty decent, right? And we've just been at it. So you know what I'm saying? I mean, you'll be that guy dancing on the dance floor at the wedding alone. And then, then the whole dance floor is there dancing with you. And that's the way this sort of activism is. So it builds on itself. Thank you guys very much. Thank you. All right. And thank you very much. James, your New Discourses is the name of your podcast.
That's right. Yeah. Newdiscourses.com. And you can find articles and videos and podcasts, blah, 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 blah. It's all there.
Podcasts are the best. I love them.
Yeah. I need to record some more, actually.
Well, if you ever want to have a guest on, you know who to call. You got 2 more guests right here. All right. Guys, have a great night. Thank you very much. And let's keep